Hello and welcome. Of late, you have heard a bizarre or a surprising story from Nagaland, where for the first time after 1963, when the state was formed, national anthem was played in the state assembly. Many people outside and within Northeast were shocked. The Northeast has several such incidents and events that are not known to many people across India. That's why this week on Simply Nitin, I'm going to bring you a backgrounder on the northeastern region of India, which is away from consciousness of rest of India, but also a mystery to many who live in the northeast. You're on Simply Nitin. I'm Nitin Gokhale. So what is the northeast all about? It consists of 7 states which are east of the Siliguri Corridor or the Chicken's Neck, connecting mainland India with that region. Now, it comprises, as I said, states of Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Nagaland, Mizoram, Manipur and Arunachal Pradesh. Now, in terms of area, Arunachal Pradesh is the largest with 83,000 square kilometers under its jurisdiction. And Tripura, with 10,000 square kilometers, is the smallest in terms of physical size. But in terms of population, Assam, with nearly 3.2 crore population, is the largest state, while Mizoram, with just over 11 lakh people, is the smallest in terms of population. Northeast has a very colorful history. It was never one region in that sense. It had several areas which were administrative units. There were 2 princely states. There was a union territory or a territory called NEFA, which was administered and which was controlled by Ministry of External Affairs till the early 60s. And that is Arunachal Pradesh. Today's Arunachal Pradesh used to be known as NEFA, Northeastern Frontier Agency. Now, the reorganization of the Northeast is also an interesting journey from the independence. When you look at the physical map of the Northeast in 1947, you had the state of Assam, you had the 2 princely states Manipur and Tripura, and you had NEFA. So what happened after that? Subsequently, from 1947 onwards, there were several agitations, several insurgencies that broke out in the Northeast, and states started forming, separate units, administrative units were formed. So there was a Lushai Hills district under undivided Assam, which is today's Mizoram. There was the Naga Hills district, which was an administrative part of undivided Assam, which is today a separate state. There was 3 districts called Garo Hills district, there were Khasi Hills district, there was Jayantia Hills district. They were also part of Assam. All 3 together became the state of Meghalaya. And then Tripura, which was a princely state ruled by royalty, was then converted into a state. And so was Manipur, which was annexed, which was merged into India in 1949, became another state of the Union of India. So if you look at the Northeast as a whole, the region is about 7% of India's total landmass and about 4% of India's population. Small area, smaller population, and again, completely away from national consciousness for years together. The change, if at all, started happening towards the late 80s, early 90s, when insurgencies were at their peak in all states across the Northeast. Although insurgency began in the Northeast as early as 1956 in the Naga Hills, when the Naga movement under Angami Zapu Fizo launched an insurrection in the Naga Hills. And then, of course, it still continues in one form or the other in the state of Nagaland and some neighboring parts of Manipur and Assam. It can be termed that the Naga insurgency is the oldest continuous running insurgency in Asia, if not the world, because it started in 1956. India has had a very checkered relationship with the Naga insurgency and subsequent insurgencies in the other states. And if you look at the journey of political integration of these states with rest of India, I won't call it mainland India, which a lot of people say that Northeast is one region and mainland India is another. I would say rest of India actually got aware of the Northeast in bits and pieces over the years as the nation progressed from 1947. And I divide the history of Northeast in 4 phases. And interestingly, I divided along the lines of the tenure of the prime ministers. So if you look at the prime minister, the first prime minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, who was prime minister from 1947 to 1964, 17 continuous years, his tenure was marked by a kind of benevolence towards the Northeast. He had this notion about Northeast that they are different people, they are very innocent and very straightforward people. Let them remain what they are. Let's not spoil them by sending people from rest of India. Let them follow their own customs and traditions. So he was like a benevolent dictator or a benevolent benefactor of the Northeast who didn't do much about the Northeast for in terms of development, because he thought, let them be, let them continue with what they were. That was his phase. Then came Indira Gandhi in 1966 as the prime minister. Of course, in between there was Lal Bahadur Shastri for a very brief period from May 1964 to January 1966. But his tenure was too short to even think of any impact he had on the Northeast. So if you look at Indira Gandhi's tenure from 1966 to 1977, and then from 1980 to 1984, before she was killed on 31st October 1984, assassinated rather. So if you look at Indira Gandhi's tenure, even in 2 parts, she adopted a 2-pronged approach to Northeast. She was Lakshmi as well as Durga. And I'll explain why I say that. When I say Lakshmi, it is her style was that if you can't beat them, buy them. She started adopting this attitude after cracking down on insurgencies in Mizoram, or the Lushai Hills district of undivided Assam. In February 1966, there was an insurrection. The Mizo rebels under the Mizo National Front almost took control of that district, which is now a state. But they were sort of beaten back by Assam rifles. And the only instance of the Indian Air Force bombing India's own population, civilians, or the targets inside India came in March, April 1966, when the Mizo insurrection broke out. Now, that of course was brought under control, and finally there was an accord in 1986, but that we'll talk about in perhaps the second part of this 2-part series that I'm going to bring to you as far as Northeast is concerned. But Indira Gandhi's tenure was marked by these 2 approaches. She wanted to buy the people there by pouring in as much money as possible into the Northeast, when her hard approach of cracking down on militants and insurgencies did not work very well. So she formed in 1971 something called the Northeastern Council. Through it, a lot of money was pumped in for developmental works, and that created a new rich class in the Northeast. It created divisions between the newly empowered politicians, bureaucrats, businessmen who became rich overnight, and they became the haves, and the rest of the population remained have-nots. That tenure of Indira Gandhi was marked by these 2 approaches. So Durga was her hard avatar, or her fierce avatar, where she cracked down on the insurgencies in Lushai Hills, now Mizoram, and in Manipur in the late 60s, early 70s, but also adopted this approach of bribing, if I can use that word, a rather strong word, but bribing the population of the Northeast and winning over some of the sections of the population by encouraging, or at least ignoring the corruption that that kind of money unleashed in the Northeast. That was her tenure. Then in between, of course, the Rajiv Gandhi's tenure came in from 1984 till 1988. He was young, he was fashionable, he wore jeans, he had a a foreigner as a wife, Sonia Gandhi, and he was welcomed in the Northeast as one of their own, because many of you will know that fashion scene in the Northeast in terms of dressing, in terms of following fashions from the West, English speaking population, and of course church going population, they all loved Rajiv Gandhi because he was young and he looked progressive. So he came up with several accords in the Northeast during his tenure. In fact, it became such a joke in the Northeast, and I know it's a poor joke, but it's worth repeating. At one point of time, he was called the accordion because he did an Assam Accord in 1985, the Mizoram Accord in 1986, the Gokhale Accord in 1987, and of course, one accord in Punjab in 86-87, not to speak of the accord in Sri Lanka in 1987. That notwithstanding, he was for some point of time very popular in the Northeast for the accord that he did both in Assam and Mizoram. And then subsequently, a series of prime ministers, Deve Gowda, I.K. Gujral, followed by, before that, of course, Narasimha Rao, who was so embattled because he was running a minority government, he did not have enough time to pay attention to the Northeast, although his star performer in that government of 1991 to 1996 was Dr. Manmohan Singh, who was elected for the first time in the Rajya Sabha from Assam. So he had a Northeast connection, but he didn't have time to pay attention to the Northeast. Following Narasimha Rao as Prime Minister, there were these other Prime Ministers, Deve Gowda, A.K. Gujral, and then of course Vajpayee came in for 2 tenures, 1996, 1998, and then from 1999 to 2004. It was the Vajpayee government following up on Deve Gowda's initiative. And now this is the surprising part. Deve Gowda may not be remembered as a great Prime Minister, but he was the first Prime Minister in the history of the Northeast who spent 7 consecutive days in the Northeast in November 1996 to understand the problems of the Northeast. That was followed up by Vajpayee by creation of a ministry, of initially a Department of Northeastern Region Development, and now a Ministry of the Development of Northeastern Region, or DONOR. That was the Vajpayee tenure. Then of course the Manmohan Singh tenure from 2004 to 2014 was marked by erratic performance or erratic attention towards the Northeast. And now, of course, there are several other initiatives that have been followed up from what the initial plans were in the early years of this century. And we'll come back to that in the second part of these episodes on Simply Nitin. But what I wanted to tell you was, Northeast may not have suffered as many fatal casualties or killings like people in Punjab suffered during partition. But Northeast has had prolonged effect on its psyche as well as its lack of development because of partition. And that I'll explain again in the other episode that I'll do immediately. But it added to mental isolation because all its physical links to the rest of India through what was earlier East Bengal, later East Pakistan, and now Bangladesh were cut off because of partition. And the old British policy of leave them alone was refined to the out of sight, out of mind policy followed by several governments from 1947 to, I would say, the beginning of this century. That led to neglect, which resulted in several grievances being formed, either perceived or real, which led to insurgencies and insurrections and agitations, which we will talk about as we progress into the second episode. The Northeast is unique in very, very many ways. It's got several tribes, several languages. Its natural beauty is different. Its traditions and the languages, as well as the mix of religion there, is completely different from the rest of India. So we'll talk about that in the second episode. But keep watching Simply Nitin and of course StratNews Global, and keep subscribing to our YouTube channel. Like us on our social media platforms, and of course keep sending feedback and your comments. All of them are welcome. Until the next time, it's goodbye.